morning. Good morning to everybody who stayed with us, even though we are 6 minutes late. Apologies for this. We're still here, ready. We're online, in line, and ready to report to you. It is March the 10th today, and we are going to have the 161st episode of Japanese Politics One-on-One with the CEO of Langley Square, Timothy Langley. Timothy, I'm not going to keep people waiting anymore. The floor is yours, so brace yourself. And
Thank you
yes,
very much, Maya. Good morning, everybody. Today is March 10th, 2024. This is our 161st episode. Thank you very much, Maya, and thank you to everyone who's tuned in and stuck with us for the more than 3 years that we've been doing this broadcast. So I'm broadcasting today from the good ship Garuda, where we have been um, restoring a 33-foot yacht for the last couple of weekends. And so I'm a little bit out of sorts today, and I apologize for signing in a little bit late. There's a lot going on in Japanese politics and the economy. A lot is to be anticipated as we gear up to the April 10th, 1 month away, Joe Biden and Fumio Kishida um, state visit. So you might recall from last week that the prime minister was able to pass the budget just by the skin of his teeth, not in terms of getting the votes, but yes, getting the votes, but also the very last day that he could have passed the budget so that he doesn't have to worry about the upper house passing or not passing the bill. If the lower house passes the bill and gives the upper house 30 days to contemplate and pass it on their own, then whether they accept it or decline it, it still becomes law. So in 30 days, actually less than 30 days, by April 1st, the budget will pass. It is a tremendous budget. It is not the largest on record. It is the second largest. The largest was last year, but this year it is a 112 trillion yen, which is about 750 billion US dollars. It's a massive one to take care of a lot of different things: tax relief, Noto Peninsula, and just getting the economy going. There's a lot going on with the economy that's irritating not just consumers and the general population and laborers, but also the prime minister, who has long touted this virtuous cycle of investment and revenue and people's wages going up and the economy starting to buzz. The economy is really suffering, actually, although the Nikkei broke 4 Yonman yen per share just this last week. That is a tremendous success if you're in the stock market. Um, they're not there today because the share prices fell a little bit, but it is a remarkable achievement. You might recall, if you're a subscriber or you're listening to our briefings from time to time, that two records were broken just last week. It wasn't at Yonmayan, it was Sanmayan plus approaching Yonmayan. So it's a big deal that it broke Yonmayan, well, 40,000 yen per share uh, overall for the 225 Nikkei index. But pundits say this is just the beginning. It's going to continue to rocket forward. The share prices are going to continue. The problem here is that it doesn't really reflect itself throughout the rest of the economy. So household spending has dropped just this last month, 6.3%. This is the biggest drop in household spending in 35 months. The GDP of the country dropped 0.4%. Japan is technically in a recession. In October, December, the GDP was at this amount or less, and so technically two quarters in a row mean it's in a recession. There's a lot of controversy going on there. People are saying we're coming out of the deflation spiral, but the chief cabinet secretary, Mr. Hayashi, said just on Friday he wasn't quite so sure about that. So propping up the numbers, propping up the prime minister by saying the economy is getting back on its feet is a high point. But I think people are listening a lot more carefully to what the prime minister and what's going on in the parliament than normal. You might remember that Japanese politics was not that popular, not that much of a big deal, 8 months ago. But now it's really the flavor of the month. Their current account surplus for the country is 438 billion. In January, it was 2.9. So the important part here with the current account surplus is that um, exports versus imports, and this is the first time in many months that Japan has had an account surplus. Usually they are in the deficit. At this point last year, remember the number I told you was 438 billion in surplus. This time last year, January, it was 2.1 trillion in a deficit. So in just 12 months, it's come up. That means that the number of the value of imports compared to exports has changed. So um, this time last year, there was still COVID going on, and the economy was not doing very well. This year, you've got plenty of tourists coming in, and the purchase of cars and the export of uh, um, semiconductor manufacturing equipment has really rocketed too. So let me see. The imports for the last couple of months have been down. Imports down 12%, while exports are up 6.7%. So as a consequence of that, and the consequence of the value of the yen today is at 147 yen to the dollar, or dollars to the yen, 147. It's still close to that 150 mark that benefits terrifically the exporters and the car manufacturers, semiconductor equipment manufacturers, but it doesn't do very much for the internal economy. So this economy for a long time has been driven by external forces, not internal forces. So the prime minister is trying to right that, and part of that was passing this budget last week. Um, at the same time, though, the general population, but also within the Diet, the opposition parties are increasingly angry with the prime minister with this somewhat sleight of hand and not really a serious treatment of the kickback scandal. So it's not the fact that it's gone away because the budget has been passed. In fact, it's shifted gears. So when now the upper house should be considering the budget and debating it, what they're doing instead is they're using this time to hammer on the 31 upper house members who have been involved in the scandal. So we know who these people are, we know how much money they got, and now the idea from the upper house, because the upper house can call on people within that chamber to come and testify in their ethics committee, they can't insist on people from the lower house. So there's a real distinction between the scope of authorities between upper house and lower house members. So the upper house ethics committee is still having the same sort of struggle that they were having last week. There was a lot of horse trading by the prime minister to get the budget passed, and the opposition party was saying we're not going to pass the budget unless we have some of the 51 members of the Abe faction and uh, what's the other faction? And the Nikkei faction, testifying about how much money they got in kickbacks. The funny thing to me is we're only hearing about Nikkei and the Abe faction violators, but when this whole scandal first broke, it was four factions, the Motegi faction and the Kishida faction, who were also fingered as violators, and we don't hear anything about that. So it's a curious shell game that's going on, and I think people are recognizing that. The other thing that's irritating the prime minister is he has by-elections coming up on the 28th of April. We've talked about this a couple times. There are three by-elections going on. There's a by-election in Shimane Prefecture to replace the member, or to place a candidate there for the position that was held by Mr. Hosoda, who died in office. And so this by-election is to fill that. There's another one in Nagasaki, where the incumbent there was involved in a scandal for purchasing votes, an LDP member. And then we have another one in Tokyo 15, also an LDP member, lost his position there due to loose use of political funds. These are all three political districts that were run by the LDP. And the LDP doesn't really have any good candidates for all three of these. So it looks like on the 28th, when the votes are counted, the LDP is going to come up very short. It was thought that perhaps the Prime Minister would use this opportunity to close the Diet, riding on the wings of a very successful, he hopes, Biden-Kishida state visit on the 10th. But it looks like that is maybe not in the cards because the LDP doesn't even have a candidate for some of these seats. And it's basically relinquished the role for the opposition parties to fight. So there's a real dynamic going on there. And you can imagine the Prime Minister is really looking forward to this state visit by with Mr. Biden. This is a big deal, not since Shinzo Abe visited with Obama in 2009, I believe, has a Japanese uh, premier, had a state visit to the United States. And it's also rare and significant that he is going to be speaking to a joint chamber of the Congress. I don't know. I've asked. Um, I would have assumed that he's going to be speaking in English to the joint chamber, but I don't think I haven't received a confirmation on that. I know he speaks English. He was the longest serving foreign minister, but it's kind of up in the air. I can't imagine he would be speaking through a translator. The ability to impact the audience is so great that I don't think he'd let that pass. But it is curious right now at this point that we're not quite sure. There's also a little bit of controversy going on with the Motegi faction. Mr. Motegi, as you know, is the Secretary General of the LDP. And it turns out that there's been a little bit of investigation of a tremendous amount of money over a vast number of years that has been contributed by a political contributor or a supporter. And it looks like there's a lot of money that's being unspoken for. So people are being kind of nervous and quiet about that. But I think the stage is set for something explosive to happen with Mr. Motegi. Remember, when we're talking about the Prime Minister as not only the leader of the LDP, but also as a consequence, because the LDP is so large, that the party president becomes the Prime Minister as well. That term of office, being the party president of the LDP, ends in September. And one would have thought that Mr. Motegi was a top contender for the replacement role. We've gone into that issue at some depth. You might remember that Maya and Dan Harada had a discussion about the next prime minister possibly being a woman, or at least 3 or 4 of the candidates for prime minister might be women. And we had a discussion on that, though the story is not yet told, but it doesn't look like Mr. Motegi is in a good position to claim his candidacy. Being a candidate for prime minister only requires that you have 20 members of the parliament endorse you as a candidate, and there are plenty of people who would qualify for that. I think currently there are 2 that clearly qualify for it, but it's a long way away. The prime minister hasn't gone to Washington D.C. We haven't had the by-elections, and there's still a lot more to be said. Going on to other news, geopolitically as well, it seems that the relations between South Korea and Japan have hit something of a stall in development. The prime minister was supposed to visit on the 18th in actually at the end of this week. And that visit has been canceled for various reasons. But also, it turns out that the relationship between South Korea as they enter their general elections will be on the 10th of April, the same day that the Prime Minister visits Washington, D.C. I have said in the past, mistakenly, that it is also the date for the election for President of South Korea. It is not. I misspoke. I apologize. But it's for the general election. So President Yoon is in a bit of a pickle because having the Prime Minister visit during the campaign period would be very good news for him and for his party. And the fact that it was canceled, uh, you have to scratch your head and wonder why. What was the thinking behind that? And it might just be that the sentiment directed towards Japanese businesses, um, at the personal level, it's like with many countries, people love to travel, to eat, to interact at the personal level. But when it comes to politics or government, things become a lot more difficult. And I think that's precisely the story in between South Korea and Japan. The people, thousands of people travel to South Korea. South Koreans love to come to Japan. Uh, there seems to be, a lot of affinity there, but at the political level, there's still a lot of reticence about what happened during the colonial period and the ability or the acknowledgement of the Japanese government to pay reparations for those people who suffered. And that's still a burning issue. We thought it was resolved. The Japanese government thought that it was conclusively resolved with the several agreements, not only including the peace treaty, but it still continues to be an irritant that just escapes resolution. So we're going to keep our eye on that. But South Korea and Japan being on a very friendly footing is good for everybody. There are other things that are going on. Tokyo 15 is the election district which is up for a by-election, and the LDP does not have a candidate there. And we've talked about the women who could potentially run in a race for prime minister, and one of the names that came up is Yuriko Koike, who is the governor of Tokyo. She has been really prominent recently. If you've been following the news, she's announced a couple of things. She's been involved in a couple of initiatives. Friday was Women's Day. She was very active and very visible there. There are a couple of other things that are going on that I guess as a governor, you're always in the news, but it strikes me that there's a little bit more emphasis going on there. There are two issues that just came up this last week that I'd like to talk about. One is there's a Peace Day memorial that was set up by the metropolitan government, and this initiative was started about 30 years ago for people to talk about their wartime experiences. Yesterday was the anniversary of the Tokyo firestorm bombing that killed maybe 89,000 Japanese nationals, destroyed 260,000 houses as the American gained access from Saipan to bomb Tokyo. So this wartime effort of bombing Tokyo continued until the Japanese surrendered, and it was devastating. And there are remnants of that conflict even today, and people honor it. And there are various districts in Tokyo where you can go and visit on those special days. They have memorials, but the Tokyo government has decided to open the files. They were kept on ice in a vault for 30 years because although they collected the recorded transcripts and the video footage of people talking about their experiences, there was so much controversy about releasing it that it never did anything. It was just sitting in vaults, and finally the governor has authorized that these snippets be released to the public. So it's on a program of release every Sunday, I believe. There are opportunities for the general public to come and to listen to these testimonials. The other thing is that Tokyo entered the Guinness Book of World Records by hosting a grand scale projection mapping, which uses the huge Tokyo Metropolitan Government Building as the backdrop. So this is occurring nightly from February to April. Starts at 7 o'clock, and it is the largest projection mapping in the world. They had a big press release. A lot of people came in, music and stuff like that, and the governor was prominently, sucking it all in. So that's another thing that happened. We don't know what's going to happen with Miss Koike or what's going to happen with Tokyo 15, but we're keeping our eyes on it, and so there's lots going on that you can look forward to there. We talked last week a little bit about parental kidnapping, you might remember. And the Diet, of course, listening to this show, took cue on that, and they submitted a bill on joint custody of children in the event of divorce or split up. This has been a huge issue, as you know, or you might not know, between Japan and many of its trading partners, because foreigners that get married to Japanese nationals run into this problem from time to time. I mean, divorce is a fact of life, and it happens in the best of situations, and then what happens to the children becomes an issue. And Japan currently does not allow for joint custody. So that means that basically the person who moves to isolate the children, basically kidnaps the children first, is generally awarded the possession of the children afterwards by the courts, by the family services, by the judges who are reviewing this. So, as a consequence of no joint custody, the person who actually is the bad actor first typically comes out to be the winner. And for many people going through a divorce, they would never think of, excuse me, excuse me, doing something like that. But since it's a feature of the Japanese legal system, the Japanese are well aware of it. They're well aware of how to use that and how to manage it, how to talk about domestic violence, making them take that action. And even under the current bill that is being submitted, it will be submitted for this session, actually. So between now and June, it will be open for debate. It possibly could become law. The details surrounding it are not very expansive. There's still a lot of loopholes. If the person claims domestic violence, then they really get a lot of leeway in the decision making there. So we'll see how that happens. I think it's like the surname issue. A lot of people are clamoring for it to be resolved. That if you're married, you don't need to assume your husband's last name. There have been several Supreme Court decisions on that. It still won't go away. And so I think eventually it will be resolved. That bill is also up. But I think for the joint custody issue, there's a lot of heat on that, especially from Japan's trading partners. So something to watch. If you think the United States dominates Japan's military, it's not always clear that that's in fact the case. You might remember that 3 months ago there was an Osprey in Okinawa that crashed, actually in Kagoshima, that crashed, and all of the members on board died. None of them were Japanese nationals, but in any event, the Japanese government was very concerned and grounded all of the Ospreys. So most of the Ospreys are, or at that time, were located in Okinawa. They are um, dedicated to other areas of Japan, and there was an agreement that was reached that they have access to all of the archipelago. These ospreys, you very rarely see them, and when you do, it's a sight to behold. But the Japanese government insisted until they gave authorization that these are grounded, and these are the mainstay of the Marine Expeditionary Force. It used to be Huey helicopters, and the Ospreys are the newest delivery vehicle. So to have all of these Ospreys grounded must be a huge cost and a huge burden to the armed forces in Okinawa and elsewhere. So the fact that the Japanese government held the Americans' feet to the fire and refused to allow them to fly the Ospreys until they gave the go-ahead tells you that there is a little bit more balance than many people think between Japan and the United States with regard to the stationing of forces here. Um, I've talked about the political fight shifting from the lower house into the upper house. The same fights are there. We want to have people show up. We want them to be in an open and public ethics committee. We don't want it to be voluntary. We want it to be compulsory. And so that means that if they lie, then it's a higher violation. But I think that they've decided that there will be some submissions and some voluntary testimony. It seems in this issue, like in many issues, the LDP typically gets its way, but the Japanese population and the opposition parties are not really buying it. And in the meantime, you've got the Motegi issue that's coming up, and you have the issue of these violations. The kickback scandal is a violation in and of itself, but the tax reporting is really a clear violation of the law. Everybody's supposed to submit their taxes. You're supposed to submit your income. And with the Japanese government and Mr. Kishida saying, we've got to raise taxes in order to pay for this budget that's going to bring the Japanese defense expenditure from 1% of GDP to 2% of GDP. And we're already on a roll there. We're already expending that money, buying, Tomahawk missiles, moving the economy so that more men and material can be devoted to the defense of the country, and not only defense but also offensive capabilities, which are typically a little bit more expensive. So there's a lot of I don't know, excitement or trepidation is probably the better word, going on in the upper house hearings now. And people are just really tired and angry with this. So what the prime minister is going to do, how he's going to handle it, remains to be seen. But an issue came up just this last week. Um, Hakubun Shimomura used to be the Secretary of Education, very close friend to Mr. Abe. He was supposed to be one of the leaders of the Abe faction when Mr. Abe died, and for some reason he fell out, and they pushed him aside. And now he is saying that he is willing to testify, even though he's in the lower house, to testify in the upper house ethics committee. And this has caused a real shuddering within the LDP. The LDP um, understands that this kickback scandal was initiated maybe 20 years ago by then Prime Minister Mr. Mori. Mr. Mori, you might recall, was the chairman of the Olympic Committee, briefly. And Shimomura and Mori do not get along very well. And the fact that Mr. Shimomura is volunteering to testify uh, suggests that this cat is going to fall out of the bag pretty quickly. Mr. Mori is no longer a member of parliament, but he still can suffer a lot of damage, and this would also create, a scapegoat for what happened with the within the Abe faction. So, the way the story goes now, that it was started by Mr. Mori about 20 years ago. Nikkei faction heard about it, began to practice it too. Also, Kishida and Motegi began to do it. Not all of the factions that are officially created participated. Maybe they didn't know much about it, but there are four factions that were actively engaged in that. And the reporting or the failure to report on taxes is a very big deal. So I think you're going to start hearing more and more about that. And I think you're also going to start hearing a little bit more about Mr. Shimomura and Mr. Mori too, and how this story first unraveled in the first place. Um, I apologize once again for starting a little bit late. I had a little bit of technical difficulties here on the water, but thank you very much for tuning in. And I'd like to move on now, Maya, to Q&A. And thank you very much for the great comments that we're getting, for receiving the synopsis that we've been sending out once a week following on the briefing. So thank you very much for staying tuned. Maya?
Yes, many thanks to everybody who comments and also gives us questions and also shares their thoughts with us. We appreciate that. And we also appreciate any assistance, any help um, during the sessions, of course. So, Timothy, we have a couple of comments right now. So, one of them came while you were talking about the yes, while you were talking about the Memorial Day that the Tokyo government set up about the recordings and the bits of information about the firebombing of the city here. So on LinkedIn, Deborah wrote, "I would like to add they call it firebombing, but the U.S. should napalm used napalm, which is why it was so destructive. There is a museum in Sumida dedicated to this event. So, if you're interested, the museum is easily uh, what's that accessible, and you can find information about it online as well. And also, there is another comment from Camilo this time, Timothy. So the comment is about. Uh, Senator Haggerty 2 weeks ago introduced a new resolution recognizing the importance of trilateral cooperation among the United States, Japan, and South Korea. And also, Camilo shared the link with the resolution, which is in Clubhouse. So, if you're interested, you can see it. You can click on the link and find it there, or I can share the link later on LinkedIn as well. So, and yes, Timothy, I was also wondering about another thing. Well, we know that there was actually quite an active discussion between Komeito and the LDP about the um,
Defense
let's-
spending.
yes, defense spending and exports of military equipment. Have there been any developments in this direction so far?
That's a great observation. Who's asking that question?
Me, I'm
Oh,
sorry.
okay.
Even
Well,
though you don't expect such great questions from me, that's still, sometimes it happens. Just sometimes.
so thank you for always keeping me on my toes. I should have said something about this. So, you might recall, ladies and gentlemen, that Japan has been trying to develop a military industrial complex. It's a little bit hampered by that, number one, with the funding, but also, two, the Constitution um, restricts Japan from having offensive weapons. It has, to the limit, defensive weapons. Even though it has an army, it's not called an army. It's called the Self-Defense Forces. It is one of the largest in the world. It's probably maybe the seventh or eighth largest military force in the world. But it's not an army. It's the Self-Defense Force is dedicated to the defense of the islands. So the fight is that the LDP wants to develop a military-industrial complex. They want the Japanese Mitsubishi, the big companies, to build submarines, to build aircraft, to maybe munitions. They are already building munitions, and to use this as a lever to bolster the stock market and also to bolster the economy. The, the Japanese economy has been so sick for so long, and the LDP is looking for ways to enhance that. And they've looked overseas. They've looked at Israel, the United States, Britain, and seen what the tremendous benefits are of having a military industrial complex where the private companies also benefit from the technology and from the prowess of manufacturing, the spillover effects. We saw the same thing with the space race as well. The technologies that came out of that were in everyday products eventually. The problem here is that Komeito, their coalition partner, is very much against that. They are supporting the Constitution and the Peace Constitution, even though they're in coalition with the LDP, which wants to expand and actually dismiss Article 9 and revise the Constitution. So it's a delicate balance, and when they get into fights like this, it is something of great note. So what you're pointing out, Maya, is there is a fight going on between Komeito and the LDP, specifically with regard to the jets that are being co-developed by Italy, Britain, and Japan. And these jets will not come on, I mean, they're still in development stages. They won't come on stream for another 10 years or so, but it is a huge project. And it opens the door for other kind of offensive, or they could be defensive, um, uh, military hardware. And this is something of a kind of an initiative that's opening that door. Komeito reached an agreement with the LDP on Friday about that, but only because the LDP was having separate discussions with Ishin. Ishin is very close to the LDP in terms of politics, in terms of revising the Constitution, in terms of having a very strong military. And there are plenty of areas. So people who don't like the LDP might like Ishin. It has that kind of appeal. It's not like Komeito. It's a little bit more business oriented, and also more towards many of the policies are very representative of what the LDP promotes. So there is an affinity between the LDP and Ishin, although Ishin wants to take over the government. They want to kick out the LDP. They're not thinking of a coalition government. But in any event, the LDP did have a discussion with them, which was not appreciated by Komeito. So a couple of things happened as a consequence of that. In the upper house hearings on ethics, the leader of Komeito also took the microphone to criticize Mr. Kishida about his, or the LDP, about their lack of being very specific about what they're going to do to the violators. And um, what we find out from the prime minister's explanation there is that a week from today, the LDP will have its annual convention. And they'll talk about policies, they'll talk about moving forward, about the elections, they'll talk about it's like an annual shareholder meeting. But one of the things that we expected them to talk about was what the prime minister, who is the leader of the LDP, is going to excuse me, is going to decide to do about the violators. And what he announced is he's going to kick the ball down the road. They're not going to talk about it in this annual general meeting next Sunday. They're going to talk about other things. Excuse me. But they're not going to talk about that, and they'll talk about it later. But he didn't say exactly when, so it could be in April, May, or June. So once again, it is just you know providing just the least amount of a response to an issue that really cries for somebody to take charge and to explain what's going on and how it's going to be dealt with and how it's not going to happen again. And that seems to be a very hard struggle. So Komeito is very dissatisfied with their coalition partner, and they're making their feelings known. And it's not just about the kickback scandal, but it's also about what the LDP is attempting to do with expanding the export of offensive capabilities. So I hope that's somewhat responsive, Maya.
Yes, it does. I believe that we also need to keep this as we go forward. There is a question by Romain on LinkedIn. I'm going to read it to you. It is about the by-elections. So Romain says, great insights as always. Thank you, Tim. Regarding the April 28 by-elections, what is the deadline by when parties, including the LDP, have to announce their candidates?
Great question. Thank you, Romain. So the prime minister goes to Washington, D.C. on the 10th. He speaks to Congress on the 11th. And there is some suggestion he might visit Tennessee, where the Toyota has a huge manufacturing plant there. There was some suggestion that he might visit Brazil on his return trip. If he's going to do anything with regard to the by election, that must be done by the 16th of April. So he's in Washington, D.C. on the 10th and the 11th, probably in the United States again for the 13th or the 14th. By the 15th, he needs to make a move or the campaigning starts. So the campaign starts on the 16th and culminates on the 28th. So on the 16th, campaigning begins. You'll see posters, in various areas where the elections are being held. And election campaigning ends on Saturday, the 27th. And then the 28th is the election day. We also discovered or learned in a kind of roundabout way. I had always thought that if the prime minister was going to call for a general election, he needed to do so um, before the campaigning started for the three elections. And the fact is, he has much more flexibility. If he goes to Washington D.C. and he travels around the country, he comes back to Japan, he opens other business initiatives. He has until the last day of election campaigning that he could close down the House, and there is some speculation that he might do that. So that means that he could close down the House as late as the 26th. And the people who are preparing their campaigns for those three by-elections, so what? The fact that they've spent money and they've drummed up support, and the prime minister comes in and closes down the House, and 700 and what, 735 members of the lower house need to go for an election. He can do that. He can do that on his own volition. And I think it's somewhat attractive if the LDP is going to lose those three seats anyway, and it seems likely that they're going to lose two of them at least. That's going to be egg on face, and just to call the election and say, if he calls the election, an election has to happen within 40 days. So for the lower house, it's the same length of time as the by-election. So the 16th to the 27th. That's 11 days campaigning for the lower house. The upper house has a couple more days for campaigning. But within 40 days, there must be an election. And I think that last possible time would be June 6th, I believe, if my calculations are right. So if he has a great trip with President Biden, his picture is on the paper, he gets a lot of wind in his sails, he might contemplate doing that. But I think he has a lot more flexibility than I originally thought. He can take his time after he comes back from the state visit if he's going to close down the House. I don't know. Every week, my mind changes a little bit on that possibility. I think he just wants to stay as prime minister until the LDP party election. And in the LDP party election, it doesn't seem like there are many really great candidates to kick him off of being the president of the LDP. But at the same time, his popularity is so low. There's a lot in the air, but we're going to continue to watch it and report to you because it's not only is it keenly interesting, but it really impacts business and geopolitics too. Thanks, Ryan.
Yes, if you don't, thank you, Timothy. But if you don't mind me just noting that it's interesting how, yes, the popularity of PM Kishida is very low at the moment, but at the same time, if he gives up, if he leaves the office, and then we have another, let's say, string of prime ministers and so on, because we don't know what is coming, right? And everybody says we don't know. There are some candidates, but none of them is probably as popular as to keep this the office to be in office for a good period of time. So, I mean, from diplomatic or maybe geopolitical point of view, it's still good to have the same prime minister because it projects stability and it projects also trust, let's say, among the partners of Japan. I don't know. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think Japan didn't do itself very good benefit, didn't generate much benefit by having this rotating chair of prime ministers, as it had earlier, just before Shinzo Abe resurrected himself and became the longest serving prime minister in post-war history. It is great. I mean, they were mispronouncing his name for the first 3 years and finally got around to it. And he did have a state visit with Mr. Obama. He, yeah, I think he did great things as a recurring prime minister. And Kishida wants to do that too. And he understands, and I think a lot of people within Kasumi Gaseki also understand that having a prime minister stay there. I mean, look at Justin Trudeau. I mean, he's in Canada. A lot of people just really hate him, but the fact of the matter is that he is the face and the spokesperson for what's going on in Canada. People know him. He's very prominent. So it really benefits the country to have that kind of firm leadership. And by the way, Mr. Kishida just surpassed the term of Kakue Tanaka just this last week, I think on Friday. So he has survived longer than Kakue Tanaka, probably the most powerful prime minister that Japan had in post-war history. You know, more dynamic and more influential than even Shinzo Abe, I would argue. But yeah, I hope that somewhat responds. You know, having a steady hand at the wheel is better than changing the chairs every time the music stops.
Right. Well, great. We have Yuka with us in Clubhouse. Yuka, hello to you.
Hi. It's interesting in club. Can you hear me? In
Yes.
Clubhouse, the volume is actually higher in the audience section. When you're up on the stage, I think volume is very low, but that's why I don't want to, so I'm trying to hit the right volume here. Anyway, Timothy, my quick question is, last week, this may not be your area of interest, but Mr. Kishida made the news by addressing to the global institutional investors at Daiwa conference. And a lot of people are saying that's the sign the Japanese government is really keen on shoring up the Japanese stock market. Mm-hmm. So interesting. There's so many ways that this is very interesting because he addressed to the audience in Japanese. And there were on the screen, he was addressing to them, and then there were subtitles on the screen. So, I thought about, because you said you are not sure if he is going to talk to, the audience when he visit the Mr. Biden. But do you think that, this is sort of the change in the government when they're thinking about how to sort of shore up the Japanese economy? That's a very quick question. Thank you.
I'm sorry. Could you repeat the question itself? What is going to have an impact on the Japanese economy?
Oh yeah. Oh okay. So which part? Because I don't. Okay.
The last one.
Should I? Okay. This is a very good way to sort of like rephrasing what I just said. Thank you. I'm trying to rephrase this. So this is the very first time Japanese Prime Minister addressed to the global institutional investors on like a live. So they never done it, according to the people, what they're saying. So this is sort of the change in the government attitude toward how they're going to shore up economy as a whole. So they're sort of addressing to the global, because I thought that, oh my gosh, Mr. Kishida, he is, how he's, to come up with this time when he's in the midst of this, kickback scandal, and he has a time to make a speech to those investors.
Right. Mm. Yeah. But it's also interesting, Yuka, because I think that Timothy is still waiting for the question. But it's interesting, if you don't chime in here, it's interesting please. How actually, okay, who is the audience, of this speech? the question is, because of course it is officially, formally, it is addressed to the global investors. Right. It's in Japanese though, which tells me that maybe, it's addressed maybe more strongly, let's say, to the domestic audience, just because he needs to deal with the political fund scandal. So while it is probably trying to hit two birds with one stone, maybe the primary audience is the domestic audience. Who knows, really? And also, I wanted to say that yes. Timothy, go ahead, and then I'll.
No, I was just agreeing with you, as I'd better do.
Right.
Okay. No, actually, that's a good point, Maya. It never occurred to me. Okay, you're right. Okay. Interesting.
Well, honestly, I don't know if this is entirely the case, but it's interesting indeed. And then there is another thing, Yuka. Maybe people who are not in Tokyo at the moment don't know this, but just this past week, the government of Japan held an event which was called FinTech Summit. I mean, like,
right, I've heard that. Yes,
right, a whole week, actually, a FinTech week, and it was sponsored by the government. And there were 4 major events simultaneously, happening in Tokyo, like conferences and roundtables. And you could actually meet, the big shots from the Japanese banks, also from the fintech companies in the United States.
Yes, Mark Zuckerberg was there in Japan? Well, I think he was in Japan.
He was in Japan, and probably that was one of the reasons he was there.
Okay, interesting. Okay, I didn't put the 2 and 2 together. Okay, thank you.
Yes, yeah, but Amazon was here, and also Stripe, and also everybody. I mean, everybody who is a name and has something to say in the field of fintech was here in Japan, participating in one of these events. So who knows, really? It's interesting to see. Yes. And honestly, Timothy, we also know that the LDP published a white paper about the financial technology here in Japan. So I believe that the government in general is moving into that direction, trying to create, to set Japan up as a fintech club as well. We don't know how successful that will be, but when when there is a white paper, actually published by...
A lot of people are saying, because after the Mr. Kishida made a speech, and I thought, oh my gosh, people, the Japanese government is serious. So we have heard this time is different. In the past they had Nikkei had a nice pop, and then it's sort of doing it. But now there's this may be this time it's different. And again, I don't want to put expectation too high, but I thought that was interesting. But do you think that Mr. Kishida, you said that he was the longest serving foreign minister, right?
After Kakoe Tanaka, Mr.
Yeah.
Timothy, can you hear Yuka?
Yes, she said something about Mr. Kishida as the longest serving foreign minister.
Is that right?
Oh,
yes.
Okay, so he can speak English, right?
You would expect. You would expect him to be.
Okay, that's kind of okay.
Speaker of English, but making a speech to Congress is a little bit of a different matter. And also, there have been lots of mistakes of Japanese politicians going to the United States and making mistakes in choosing their words, and causing a bit of a kind of a ridiculous scandal back at home. I mean, people in the United States don't pay that much attention, but the people back home, there are a couple of really famous ones where not just Japanese prime minister, but prominent people on a trade delegation or something in the United States, speaking off the cuff, speaking in English, have made a slip of the tongue, and it just causes a lot of heartache. I would anticipate that the Prime Minister is going to speak to the joint session in English, but the fact that he didn't take this opportunity to speak at this event that you're talking about, it's curious, and it tells me that, like Maya said, maybe he was speaking to a different audience, not the English-speaking audience.
Mm. Yes, and there is another thing I also wondered. Yuka, just let me chime in again. If you, yeah, thank you. I think that international diplomatic protocol actually requires heads of states to speak in their own languages when they when they have high-level meetings and use translators or interpreters. Excuse me. So I wouldn't be surprised if that is the case actually with the speech in Congress. Like, why should the Japanese prime minister speak
And
in a foreign
yeah, actually,
language,
that's a
even though
very
it
good
is a
point. I thought who said that the head of the state has to speak in English, right?
That's
Mhm.
right.
He is addressing to the conference in his own country. Why he's expected to be speaking English? Is that the must-have quality as the head of the state? It's a very good point, Maya. Thank you.
Yeah.
no, thank you. I was just wondering how dynamics were there and so on. But we know for sure that the diplomatic protocols require actually the heads of state to use interpreters and speak in their own languages. Well, okay. So let me see. I think that we have a couple of more comments and questions in Clubhouse, Timothy. Um, okay, first, we have one from Cam. There is a speculation that President Biden might announce that the Nippon Steel's attempted purchase of U.S. steel poses no threat to national security under the rules of the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States. What are your thoughts on this, Timothy?
That's a very big deal. Thanks for the question, Cam. Um, uh, this is an amalgamation of two huge powerhouses, and part of the security threat is that um, purchased by a Japanese entity who has, Japan's largest trading partner is China, and for steel to be produced in Japan, for example, and shipped to China, could be considered, even though they are the purchaser of U.S. steel as well. So that's one of the security concerns. But I think the president is going to decide that this is okay because, number one, Japan and the United States are really tied at the hips. And also that this amount of investment into the U.S. economy is very helpful and timely. And I think it also impacts the prime minister's drive to drive the economy and to get more value going. Um, it's I'm not a specialist on U.S. steel or on this particular transaction, but I think the fact that it has been stalled so that the president can review it, I think he'll probably give it a thumbs up.
Okay, and then there is a follow up to this question. What effect would that have back home for Prime Minister Kishida?
Okay, who's the question from?
From Cam.
Cam. So I think it would be a big piece of news. There are going to be some people that hate it and some people that think it's great. Japan is back, and the prime minister is talking about the U.S. steel and Japan steel coming together, and the products that they'll produce, and the technologies, and the great value that they're going to be bringing to shareholders. I think it would be overall a good story. There will be some detractors, though, as there almost always are. But I think coming on the heels of a state visit, I think the timing is just perfect.
Okay, so thank you for that answer. And also, we have a question from Rumiko on LinkedIn. She says, if relevant, could you please let us know about your thoughts or any further information on the international hacking from Shanghai a week or two ago?
Okay, I think I got most of that question. It's about a story that we reported on last week. This is from Rumiko?
From Rumiko, the hacking international.
Yeah.
If you have
So we
any
reported on
information.
it last week. Um, it's a pretty big deal. It's a company that came out of Shanghai. It's got offices other places in China, and the story was broke out of the United States that diplomatic cables between several countries have been compromised, and I think I think that Japan was not mentioned highly, even though they probably are swooped up in the net. The chief cabinet secretary quickly went public and said, we understand that the United States has reported about the diplomatic cables being leaked and that the success of this hacking has been going on for several years. They've been watching it carefully and warning their trade partners in Vietnam, Thailand, Singapore. But Japan has escaped any kind of violation or loss of sensitive information. I don't know if that's accurate. I think it's probably inaccurate, but what am I going to say? That's the chief cabinet secretary reporting about that. But it is a massive hack, and it's been going on for several years, and it's coming out of China. So very worrying. I hope that somewhat responds to the question.
Yes, I hope so too. And then it looks like we have gone through all the comments. I know that you're very happy to hear this phrase every week, Timothy. Yes. Okay. So thank you very much to all of you who stayed with us in Clubhouse, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook. We are grateful for your patience, for your assistance, and for all the comments you share with us, your thoughts, and the information you share as well. Once again, apologies for starting 5 minutes late today. Hopefully, we'll be on time next week. And well, we are looking forward to having you with us again, of course. And I know that Timothy is very eager to go back to working on the boat. So, Timothy, you have this. Oh, okay. That's your work. Great.
So this yacht will be painted today. So
Today.
Evan
Oh,
is
wow.
eagerly
Okay.
waiting for me to don my overalls, my gas mask,
Mm-hmm.
and get to painting. So um, this is a culmination of several weeks of work, and we're going to get this thing ready for a Golden Week sale. So please stay tuned. And I apologize once again about signing on late. I'm just a little bit out of my element, working on the boat and then trying to make the broadcast too. But thank you for staying tuned, and thank you for being a part of what we do every Sunday.
Great. So I think that you're going to unleash your artistic spirit today. And I hope that Evan is fine with that too. Great. Okay. So thanks a lot, everybody. Once again, we'll be here next Sunday at 8:20, the same platform. I honestly don't know how I can do better on Clubhouse with the volume of the sound there. All the settings are on max on my side. Hopefully, there will be a better, um, let's say, better volume next Sunday. Let's see what happens. Wish you a pleasant Sunday. Stay warm. It's very cold here in Tokyo. And enjoy the weekend. And also have a successful next week. That's all.
It's going to be an active week, that's for sure.
Yes, that's for sure.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Maya.
Thank you, Timothy.
Thank you.